We're gearing up for the conclusion of the first round robin, with the teams looking to strengthen their positions ahead of the deciding days. First up, we've got Korea's Afrika Freak searching for their first win. We'll see if they can deliver here in Busan as they face off against Mad Team. Crazy that I'm saying that about a Korean team this far into the group stages, but nonetheless, it is true. Hello, everyone. I'm James Aspowson, joined by Indiana Frosker and Black Mark Zimmerman and Isaac Azale Cummings-Bentley for the World's Countdown. How are you guys doing today on the fourth day of group stages?
I am happy. I don't know about NA, though. I'm happy to be here.
Okay.
Not necessarily for my region.
Right, fair enough. Azale, how about you?
Doing great. Everything's fine, James.
Everything's
fine.
Fire. All right. I like the positivity going into day 4. And coming into today, the Flash Wolves are still undefeated on top of Group A, along with KT Rolster and Edward Gaming in Group C. Over in Group D, Fnatic and 100 Thieves are at 1-1 behind Invictus Gaming. And in Group B, which was named the Group of Death before Worlds, we've got 3 teams tied ahead of their deciding games.
Yeah, I don't think it's just you guys that are feeling not too hot right now. LCK also not feeling too hot if you're an LCK fan.
Definitely not. So far at Worlds, the representatives from the LPL have dominated the opposition, with EDG, RNG, and IG currently sitting at a combined 7-0 undefeated record.
I think the most surprising thing was the fact that it wasn't just RNG that showed up, but it was the rest of the LPL joining them on this golden road as they look to have an undefeated year if they can take the world crown. EDG barely scraping over 2 best-of-5s to get here, took down Team Liquid, and now have kind of solidified themselves as that second place seed in their group.
Yeah, and RNG, I think, still kind of came in as one of the tournament favorites and continue to dominate their own group. And the fact that they had what I thought was a pretty convincing win over Gen G, it was relatively close, but there was no point where it felt like Gen G was going to win, and then RNG just blew them open off one play.
And while EDG sits in solid position, they are going up against KT today, so that will be a big test for them and the LPL as a region. If they do come away with that victory, they could be finishing at 9-0 at the end of the first round robin. Or do they take their first loss today?
I mean, that's really the record. LCK currently hold it at 9-0, so it's not just the fact that it's, Clear Love versus Deft, former teammates. It's also the fact that the LPL can, scribble their name in the history books underneath the LCK. And no, 9-0 today.
You gotta remember, though, it is, I think, by far the toughest match for any of the teams. KT and RNG are touted as the tournament favorites, and it is not, RNG versus KT. It is EDG going up against this dominant team.
Yeah, success stories for the LPL, struggles for NA. One player who faced off against those LPL powerhouses was Team Liquid's Doublelift, who sees an avenue to come out ahead of groups despite their 0-2 start.
I'm here with Team Liquid's Doublelift after the loss against EDG. What's going on with the team right now, and why isn't Team Liquid able to find their win?
Team feels, okay. We're obviously really down that we're 0-2, but not like so stressed that we can't function anymore or anything like that. We're just, trying to figure out, work out our problems. Why we haven't won, though, the first game against KT, we were playing too scared, and the second game against EDG, I think we fixed our mentality a lot, but we didn't, we basically just got outplayed in fights. I'd say, we made a couple small individual errors skill usage-wise, and then we basically just lost crucial fights around Dragon, around Rift Herald, so after that, it's pretty hard to win. Basically, right now, with the way the meta is, you fight a lot, and the team that wins them has an easier time the next time.
And before Worlds even started, you and me were talking about kind of like the skill gap between NA and the rest of the teams competing at Worlds. So what do you really think the strength of NA is right now, and kind of looking at that skill gap?
Well, it's true between American teams and especially Asian teams right now, there's a huge gap. A lot of stuff that worked when we were in NA obviously doesn't work anymore, but I kind of feel like the way it works is it's kind of like that in Infinity War when Doctor Strange sees all of the possibilities, but there's only one where it's a good outcome. You have to see that one perfect play every single game, every single fight, and in every moment of the game, there's going to be a perfect play and you have to extract that out and execute on it. But Asian teams are initially when we scrim them, we're a lot better at finding that one perfect moment and kind of outplay opportunity. So for us, we're trying to find our footing, but we're also trying to keep our identity. We don't want to wait for teams to hand us wins. We want to go out and take them. So yeah, we're just working really hard at still being proactive while not taking bad fights.
And as the #1 seed coming from NA, a lot of fans are looking at you guys as NA's beacon of hope of making it out of groups. So what needs to happen for you guys to make it out?
Man, we just need to turn our play around. It's that's basically it. I think there's nothing wrong with our roster. There's nothing wrong with our mentality anymore. The only thing that's holding us back is our ability to execute. And once we fix that, we'll be good.
Thank you so much, and best of luck to you to the rest of your games. That's it for us here.
Thank you, Avali. Doublelift does not want to be handed wins. He wants to take them. But I want to dive into what he means when he talks about this perfect play or that one moment that you're searching for in a game right now that he feels might be the deciding factor in a win or a loss.
And I think for me, is really just about, it's not about one play in the whole game. It's about at any given time in the game, there are hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of different options that you can take. And it's about finding the best possible option in every moment. Do you go to the dragon? Should you push top and give up the dragon? Should you be going for mid? Do you TP bot and dive? There's all these options, and you have to be able to narrow it down to what is the best choice at any given time really quickly. And the Asian teams are doing a much better job of that.
What's so interesting to me is that Prawley also had an interview with Travis the other day, and Prawley specifically said that NA teams, he feels as a North American coach, that it's too focused on macro. And he feels like the teams are always thinking about like what they need to do with the macro, how they set up the rest of the map, and that is where TL failed. But he says the problem's not actually in the macro. That's a problem too, but the problem's in the lane phase. That the lane phase isn't taken as seriously is the word that he uses. And if you look at the CSD at 10 and 15 minutes, you can see that the Western teams are getting absolutely blown out of the water by just the laning powers. I mean, you think about why Uzi is so good. He's crushing Sneaky and Lane before they even get a chance to start fumbling some of these big macro decisions.
And I kind of disagree with Doublelift a little bit. If it's Azael's interpretation, then I do agree. But if it's like one perfect play that you think the game is hinging on, I really don't think that's how it's shaken out. You talk about the IG versus Fnatic game. It was back and forth time and time again. Like, no one is playing perfectly right now, so you don't need a perfect play to beat people. Vitality is another example. With their upset win, they fell down 3K and then just kept brute forcing mid back into the game. I think it's much more about finding a play that works for you to come back in the game than finding like the idealized version of that play.
Right. This does make me want to continue a discussion then that I kind of began yesterday on World's cooldown around whether or not there is a best way to play League of Legends. As we're looking at LPL teams sitting at an undefeated record, I mean, do they have it more figured out than any other region, and should we be trying to copy?
I think there definitely is not one right way to play the game or best way to play the game. I think it comes down to each individual team's strengths and weaknesses. If you have Uzi on your team, then hey, focusing everything on bot lane, dumping all your resources and side waves into this guy works because he's going to take over in the team fight and he's just that good of a player. If you don't have Uzi, doing that same strategy isn't necessarily going to work. If you're Cloud9 and Licorice is performing amazingly well, though, maybe you should be focusing on the top side. And you're Fnatic with Caps, hey, focus on the mid lane, play to your strengths and find what works best for your team. That's the job of every team and every coach at this tournament.
Yeah, I think that's what people should be doing, but it doesn't always work out that way. I think a lot of times, even if you have like your best player, depends how it matches up against other teams too, because like Doublelift versus Uzi, if that did happen, it'd be like, oof, do you really want to play?
Right, Doublelift is Team Liquid's strength.
Right.
So they should play there by that logic. But would they not lose into RNG still?
No, but it worked for TL when they went to MSI and they were actually able to take the game. We keep saying this again and again. If that's your strength, play to your comfort, play to your strength, because even in a huge mismatch in people's eyes where it's RNG versus Team Liquid, that was the time that TL found a win, and they haven't found one yet, so just keep doing that.
All right, well then as we talk about resources can both be delegated in-game, but as well in Champion Select. And I want to talk about how Champion Select can be adjusted or evolved to help the teams that have yet to find wins or are struggling to do so.
Right, I think even if you talk about like where your resources are going in the draft, there's also the overall team comp you're building, and I don't think there's one specific team comp that seems to be the best. There's a lot of front-to-back team fighting, but there's also a lot of dive team fights that have happened that I think are a really good opportunity for teams to come into the game. And so in the play-in stage, someone actually busted out Tarek, and if you want to play around, if you have a great support player who can play Tarek into tanky matchups which aren't that bad, you can suddenly make really disgusting comps where if you look at what they have for Infinity, it's basically 4 melees, 5 melees if you want to say Kais is going to go in and dive, and you have so many engage options that you can just keep going forward time and time again. So even if you blow one engage cooldown, you have more to follow up. It was the same thing in the Vitality upset over Gen G. They just kept going mid, and even though that Ornn ultimate was pretty atrocious, to be honest, guess what? Alistar follows up next, and you can keep going forward. And if people are picking a lot of immobile backlines, this is a much simpler avenue to victory than trying to match them in front-to-back team fighting.
And this is exactly what we saw Edward Gaming beat Team Liquid with. It was the fact that they identified Team Liquid's greatest strength is Doublelift. He's on the Kai'Sa. They have so many tools to get back there. The Nocturne, the Azir, the Lucian, all of these champions with a lot of dive potential to execute the backline.
But there's no ignoring the fact that throughout the history of League of Legends, there's always generally been a lane or a role that is considered stronger or maybe more impactful than others at that given moment, right? We've had, the Ardent sensor meta. Okay, you need to be able to play those things in the bot lane in order to be a successful team at Worlds. Without necessarily even needing to identify what that might be in this tournament, I guess my question is, Azael, back to your point. Let's say I have the strongest player in the region or I have the weakest player on my team in the strongest role. So I think ADC is the most impactful role on the entire map, but I have the 16th best ADC at Worlds. Should I still play through him?
No, I think you play to your best player. You play to your team's strength, because that is something that teams are going to be less prepared against. They've not necessarily practiced as much. And I mean, I think a good example of teams doing this is when mages were all over the bot lane, fighters and assassins and all these champions. And you look at Genji, you look at RNG, the world champion, the MSI champion, stayed true to the marksman, almost only playing that because that was their strength. And they're still able to make it work at a time where lots of pro players were saying, marksmen are garbage, you can't play them in the bot lane. Even Reckless subbing himself out.
Right. That's true. It's a great contrast and a great point. We'll see how the meta continues to develop and where teams decide to throw their priorities as the games play out. We'll see what the teams bring out today as we kick off day 4 of the group stage with a Freak of Freaks taking on Fengbu Buffalo, followed by G2 versus the Flash Wolves. From there, it's time for the teams in Group D to take to the stage with a monumental matchup to close out the day as the top teams from Group C, KT and EDG, face off on Summoner's Rift. And as always, I want to give you guys an opportunity to make a fool of yourselves with your predictions. So let's see what you've decided. Almost perfect alignment across the board, except for Frosk, who's going with Mad Team over Team Liquid.
And frankly, I just think that Mad and TL have strengths in exactly the same places. Now, before I would have waited that TL just have better players in those positions. I'm talking about, the bottom lane and the jungle position. But right now, I just don't think that TL are playing up to their cap, whereas Mad seem to have turned it on. Even in their losses, I feel like they still look better than TL have in their losses. And so I have to go with who I'm thinking is more consistent with most recency.
I kind of agree that it does almost feel like TL are the underdogs just based off their performance, but I do think that they will turn it around, actually. In this game, we'll see a lot cleaner play out of them.
Yeah, I mean, the teams that TL has played are very, very good teams. Just as you saw 100 Thieves go up against Fnatic, then 100 Thieves against G-Rex, I think this is a similar situation where this team will not be able to pressure a Team Liquid, I don't think, in the same way. And when they're given freedom and kind of more windows to succeed, I think they will.
When we return, we'll discuss some bot lane rankings and look ahead towards a Freak of Freak versus PBB. How can Korea's second seed get their first win at Worlds 2018? More on that right after this.
Ray gives a two-man knock, and Scout makes it look so sick. That's the ace for EDG. Now Q-Tag is going to be good to stay this there. Looking for the ulti, and there it is. Harlevy going to grab himself first blood.
Now Dress Spike comes down, he flashes out of it.
No one is safe at Worlds 2018.
Even though we're 0-2, I still feel pretty confident with my team. I think that we have a really good chance of getting out of groups.
Every team can still be basically first in their group. I don't feel like any team is superior towards anyone else.
Việc thi đấu với một đội Hàn Quốc tại đất Hàn thì em cảm thấy khá áp lực. Nhưng mà em sẽ cố gắng tạo ra một cái gì đó bất ngờ.
Fire still alive, Big Koro is just forcing out the DPS as Fengbu Buffalo take down G2.
7-0 for a region. Do the LPL teams just know how to play League of Legends better than anyone else? Did they figure it out?
한국 팀들이 지금 성적이 굉장히 안 좋은데 저희 팀만 이제 잘 나오다 보니까 한국 분들이 이제 막 믿을 건 KT밖에 없다 막 이런 얘기도 해주시고 하니까 조금 더 부담이 되는 것 같아요.
Aatrox diving back in, but Yukon naps the double and KT collapsed beautifully.
This is why everyone is terrified of KT.
现在 LPL 还没有输过嘛？我觉得这说明就是 LPL 来了3支队伍就来变强了嘛。然后 LPL 整个赛区也是我觉得是很强的。
EDG versus KT, the undefeated LPL versus the undefeated LCK team.
Does the LPL suffer their first loss tomorrow? Welcome back to the World's Countdown, about 11 minutes away from Game 1. And while there are some superstars and plenty of roles, one position packed with talent is the bot lane. So I asked Froskerin to create a tier list for the ADCs. Let's take a look at that now.
And let me tell you, I am very good at recognizing greatness when it comes to this position. So this is top 5 at this tournament. I got Uzi, Betty, Jackie Love, Deft, and iBoy. And how this goes, gentlemen, is that you see my list and now you try to tear it apart.
Yeah, for me, I'm missing Ruler. I know a lot of people are actually going to point to that Sion play, like, oh, what a bad flash, but I think he has been really, really good, individually throughout a lot of the tournament, and even in that RNG game, reactively being able to ult out of a lot of Ming's engages. I think he has performed very well as a single player. Obviously, the team has not been doing as well as a whole, but that would be the one that really stands out as kind of missing more to me.
Yeah, and I think for me, I don't know if I'd have Ruler on it, but I think Betty might be a little high for me. He's been
as number 2.
As number 2, he's been great, but I felt like he hasn't had like a tough challenge yet. Whereas I felt like some of the other players have had to go up against like a Korean versus Chinese matchup and come out on top. Whereas the game they played versus Africa was not like that crazy to me. Would have felt like their draft was just so much better. I didn't feel like it was much on Betty to like super hard carry that game, though he did play well.
I just think that from a perspective, because I agree, when I was looking at Betty's numbers, they just kept jumping up to me. This guy is undefeated, right? Or he hasn't died yet this tournament. He's got an 18 KDA, all of his damage percentage and damage share. And you look at the compositions, I mean, he had a Kaisa comp, and then he had a bunch of tanks stacked in front of him. So I agree that while the level of competition hasn't been the highest, the fact that the Flash Wolves are so confident to just put everything in Betty, and the fact that we just keep underselling these guys. In fact, not just Betty, my honorable mentions also go to the other 2 LMS ADCs in Breeze and Stitch. And I just feel like collectively as a region, we know them as Maple Carsa every single time. Sometimes it's Mountain, sometimes it's Westor. No one ever talks about the ADCs. On and NL are dead. These guys now reign supreme.
They're dead.
Their numbers are great.
Yeah, I mean, they have been playing very well. And I will say, you can't fault someone for the other team not playing well, right? You can only kind of like, for now, we're judging off of a couple of games. This is at World's performance. So you kind of have to look at almost the individual performance in isolation. And it's like, it's not their fault if Freak controls the draft.
Yeah, definitely fair as well. I'm just a little sad. No East. Oh,
I hear you. I hear you.
For sure.
How do you respond to the Ruler point? Because if those are honorable mentions, it almost suggests that Ruler's even further down the list.
So I mean, an honorable mentions in terms of I just wanted to give some credit to LMS.
Okay.
Ruler was my 6th. The only reason why I didn't put him on the list is I looked at someone like iBoy and Jackie Love, and I thought, okay, they've made, this tournament so far in the 2 games they've had, they went the distance. They made the carry play, whereas Ruler hasn't gotten that moment yet. Not to say that he can't step up and very quickly take someone like iBoy off the list.
Fair enough. Still plenty of time for all of these players to make their case to be at the top of that tier list. With just 1 day left of the first round robin, we're going to do our fans a favor and answer the question on everyone's mind. Is it time to press the panic button? So let's start with the first seed from the EU LCS in Fnatic. Panic or not?
I mean, I feel like Fnatic's pretty fine right now, but maybe I'm saying that as the LPL/EU-ish representative.
This is as you're slowly going over.
Exactly. A lot of people knew that this was going to be a very close game, that these were explosive teams. Both these guys are racing for top 4, and I feel like we got the game to measure up to that. It was incredibly exciting. The one thing that I felt cheated, I didn't want to see Caps on the Swain. I wanted to see him go toe-to-toe. He pulled out the huge carry performance against 100 Thieves, and then maybe took a step back. But I feel like very quick fix, put everything in the Caps basket, and EU are on the way up.
It's hard not to be disappointed with how that game went, but I think that's different than Panic, which is like, oh my God, we're on fire. And I really don't feel that way at all for Fnatic. They're going to go up against GRX today, and they looked so much better than 100 Thieves. I think even if they do end up coming out second behind IG, that's not something to panic over.
I think the only reason to be panicking at all would be if you have the expectation that they are a top 4 team, or that they are going to live up to a lot of the hype that people have been setting as pre-tournament expectations, because a lot of people didn't even have IG in that top 4. And if you're going to be losing there and Caps is destroyed in the mid lane, maybe there's some reason to worry.
Okay, yeah, based on the expectation coming in. All right, try this one on for size. Team Liquid.
Mark?
Yeah.
After you?
Sure, absolutely. You're going to go.
Yeah. Panic! Steve, help us. All right, okay, so we're panicking right now for Team Liquid. Full-blown panic. But break it down for me. Why are we panicking? And if there's any way
we get out of this,
Start with that.
I did watch the games.
The scariest thing is, this hyper carry double that we're supposed to be seeing as 1 kill in this 2 games. They have completely failed to launch at all. They haven't had a single successful team fight. They have done an okay job in the early game of protecting Doublelift and reaching these mid games, but then once they get there, they just completely explode in team fights.
And to me, I know people are talking about the 1 kill on Doublelift. That actually is not really that big of a cause for concern. I think his laning has been fine. The team has just looked so out of sorts. They're not communicating. The execution in the team fights has been abysmal, and that is certainly very concerning when you're not expecting them to beat KT at all. You're now looking, hey, you probably have to beat Mad twice, then beat EDG in the rematch, and then maybe you get a tiebreaker, or you probably have to win again. And like, that is just such a hard road.
I mean, everyone keeps saying Doublelift's name, but for me, it's really Pobelter's name. And I feel like there are champions in this meta that Pobelter can perform on. I'm surprised that we haven't seen someone go for the Malzahar. I know he's a great Malz player. They keep going for like the Galio is kind of like this halfway, like, I don't think I'm gonna win the mid lane, but if I play Galio, no one's gonna kill me, I'll play for team. Just stop, just play Malz.
Would you be happy if
he can't play Galio,
yeah,
they can't win. Yeah. Like, I think that's one of the easiest mid lane champions there are. Like, I agree with Malzahar, but like Malzahar, Galio, like
Sion are all the same bucket.
But when Nocturne's such a pickable jungle right now.
I mean, if you look at some of those games, there's no way that he shouldn't have been able to take his ult onto Doublelift as he's getting headbutt pulse combo.
There were better ways to play the Galio, even though the Nocturne was in that game. One more team I want to talk about. A Freak of Freaks.
In the middle.
Are we panicking there yet? Anyone want to reach
for
for it? Franz is going to go for it. All right, explain the panic for me.
So the thing is that it's a jungle substitute first and foremost. Mowgli coming over Spirit. I don't agree with it. I think Spirit's the much stronger jungler. But more specifically for the Afrika Freaks, this is a team who is known for discipline. They are known for their draft phases, and they have fumbled too in very different ways. So it feels like Afrika have a bad meta read, that they are just trying to figure out what is going to work at this tournament, and they can't land there. And when you're in Korea, when you're under that pressure, it is unacceptable for the Korean fans to see one of their Korean teams, Korea collectively is 3-4, you remove KT, that's 1-4. That is panic for the LCK. They have never been in a position like this.
So I'm not panicking just yet, only because I think Afrika has had weak performances in the regular season. While they are really known for their drafts, it's more about their playoff drafts where they have a lot of pre-preparation, where they have learned from and then adapted to the meta. I think give them a little bit of time. If they lose today, I'm definitely panicking.
Okay,
but
I was going to say they only have so much time.
I think if you pick up the win today, they can make adaptations, and I expect them to do that as their coaching staff has really been one of their biggest strengths.
I think relative to expectations, sure, you can panic, but in terms of getting out of the group, I still have a lot of confidence in them to actually get out of the group. I don't think anyone other than Flash Wolves looked particularly strong in that group, and the second seed is completely wide open. There's no favorite right now, and I think if Afrika can turn it around, that they suddenly are fine. And in that world, it's not that big of a deal.
But this is the X factor then, and that means that a Korean team gets out in second seed, which their chances of then bumping into, let's say the other two Korean teams take first seed, suddenly Korea has that chance of taking each other out.
Yes, very much so. We'll see what Afrika Freaks can do in their first game as they face off against PVB from the VCS.
Yeah, and I think the matchup everyone's going to be looking at here is Zeros versus Keen, and they have met a couple times in solo queue. Apparently, Zeros has destroyed him in there, and we want to see that translate over to the big stage because, you know, Afrika looks very vulnerable right now, and Keen has not had any of the big performances he was hyped up to get.
I think it's about kind of resetting the table. Is this actually an upset right now, you know, of PVB, who are technically 1-1 and have looked stronger almost across the board than the Afrika Freaks have if they win? Now, all of us picked Afrika. I think that we're kind of going back to that same tendency of, you know, it's the LCK team. We respect what they're going to do. You just give them some time and they will come online. But where stylistically these teams match up, it is about these superstar top laners. Keen, number 4 on our World's 20 list. Zeros is supposed to be kind of the superstar of the VCS region. I think it's almost a perfect storm almost for PvP to at least be competitive in this match, whereas normally at the beginning of this tournament, we would have said no way.
Yeah, and I'd also say, you know, PvP, they did lose their first game, but Flash Wolves has looked like the strongest team in the group. That was, you know, perhaps some jitters, perhaps some nerves. They looked solid against G2, played a strong macro game there. So we don't necessarily have the best read on where their strength lies. I think this will tell us a lot about that. But that being said, I still certainly favor Afrika.
Yeah, and I think for PvB, they do play mostly standard. And so for Afrika to start turning their drafts around, they don't have to worry, hopefully, as much about a curveball coming in the draft. So if they've done a good job preparing, coming in here and like fixing their mistakes about picking a Kali into multiple tanks and stuff like that, then this should be a good turnaround game for them because they don't have to worry about some of these stranger picks coming in.
For me, I really want the mid lane to show up. I think we talked about the top laners. I think bringing a jungle sub against probably the strongest position on PvP, which is their jungler. I think Uniboy has looked a little suspect or not as inspiring. And I think Afrika can really punch through there if they maybe grab a carry-oriented pick in that mid lane and really just try to set up Mowgli for success in that 2v2 jungle mid face-off.
Let's talk a little bit more about Mowgli and the fact that this substitution is coming in. Quite obviously, Afrika was sitting at 0-2, and a piece of it almost feels like, well, when you're sitting, you know, in a place without a win, you have to make some kind of a change. But what should we expect in terms of differences between Mowgli and Spirit? I
mean, Spirit's the much more prestigious jungler. I feel like Personally, when I watch Spirit, I feel like he knows exactly where he's going to go on the map. He can play multiple styles. Mowgli, sometimes a little bit questionable decision-making. You can get kind of those hot and heavy moments from him, so it's just a bit more volatile, but you can have higher highs.
Right, and that's, I think, what they're hoping for is kind of like that spark plug that you kind of insert into a roster when things are not working well. We've heard some grumblings about that, like maybe the team environment is a little demoralized right now, and just any change can give you that kind of revitalization you need to get the fire back in these games.
Right, start some action, you get a couple kills rolling in early, and everything changes when it comes to the mood of the team. We're ready to hit the rip for our first game, so let's leave it to Captain Flowers and Vedius for picks and bans.
Thank you very